Minorca is 700 square kilometres, and I think we have virtually 2,000 archaeological sites. To start with, this fact shows a very high density of archaeological sites per square kilometre.
The overall conservation level of prehistorical architectural structures in Minorca is exceptionally good.
The Minorcan Talayotic people were highly praised around the Mediterranean as slinger men. Even they were recruited to work as mercenaries in both Carthaginian and Roman troops.
The Talayotic culture is found not only in Minorca but also in Mallorca, although they present slight differences between them. For instance, in Mallorca we do not find taula areas.
In fact, the talayots, although we call everything a talayot, those we have in Minorca are very different. The funerary navetes are also a unique type of construction in Minorcan prehistory.
The monumental scale and the conservation level of the remains are really important.
The first contact ever of human beings with the island of Minorca dates back only about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago.
This is precisely the issue. We know that the Maiatragus existed before the settlers. We know that it became extinct with the arrival of the first settlers, although we have no clear data about their contact.
The arrival of human beings provoked the Maiatragus extinction, a native goat. There are several hypotheses as to how this came about. It became extinct due to hunting, to the introduction of food competitors, or that those species accompanying the humans had some new viruses or illnesses that affected the endemic species.
1,000 years after their arrival, a great social change occurred. The population increased considerably, monumental constructions were built, and its warriors became significantly more coveted. This was the Talayotic period.
The current dates we deal with are between the 1000 BC and 1200 BC of the Talayotic period itself, until the Roman arrival in the 123 BC. Although these dates range considerably as new discoveries and new excavations are being carried out. For example, we have not yet established the exact moment in which they started building talayots, the characteristic monument of the Talayotic culture.
The existing species in Minorca before the arrival of humans were very limited in variety. Furthermore, the presence of humans caused them to disappear almost completely. The diet of Talayotic communities depended highly on the animals that came to the island along with humans in each different landing. This means that the variety of fauna found in the Talayotic period was also very limited and were only focused on the traditional native species: goats, sheep, cows and pigs. We also found trace presence of dogs. Although they weren't eaten, dogs would have been there to help shepherds guard their flocks.
All of our evidence seems to indicate that they lived with their backs turned on the sea, meaning it was rather cattle and farming society. Hence, sea resources were not exploited.
I think that during the Talayotic period, there was an extensive population spread to non-marshy territories. We must bear in mind that particularly on the north of the island, there was extensive areas of flooding. Therefore, mosquitoes made those areas unbearable and virtually uninhabitable. We could be talking maybe 5,000 inhabitants, and that could have even increased to 7,000 by the end of the Talayotic period.
The three largest sites we have are distributed around the island. Son Catlar in the western area, Torre de Galmes, more or less located in the center, and another large village of the Talayotic period should have been the one of Trepuco.
The traditional view of the inhabitants of the island, especially in summer, was that they were naked. We don't know to what extent, but it seems to have been the case. We also have some sources that say they wore tunics. We think they could have been made of natural wool with red sashes. Perhaps this was the winter attire, and then they were naked in summer. We kept some remains of a loom from the end of the Talayotic period, and we found some punic amphora handles that were reused as a pommelus to knit.
Rituals that took place in Taulas, in the Taula areas, in sanctuaries of the Talayotic period, are not yet well described. Usually animals were sacrificed at different ages. In the sanctuary of Torralba, for instance, it seems that there was a high number of young animals, very young, and this fact did not coincide with the strategy of using flocks during the Talayotic period. For example, in Torre den Galmes, within its Taula area, a small statue of Imhotep, the Egyptian god of medicine, was found. In some way, the community living in Torre den Galmes integrated this little statue into their religious world. This surely means that it was a polytheist religion. That's why they had certain ability to assimilate elements from other religions.
In fact, within the Taula area of Torralba den Salod, a small bronze statue of a bull was found. The bull was the strongest animal around the island at the time. It was the animal that helped with land tasks and was therefore very important. For this reason, it was worshipped in some way.
Some amphora remains have been found too. It may be that they were used to drink wine at some of these religious rituals.
The Mark Balearicus are also several small bronze statues found to represent a naked warrior wearing a helmet. It may have also been a kind of deity.
The Talayotic society was not a peaceful one. We have a lot of evidence that there were conflicts between different settlements. We have found evidence of fortresses, and we have also documented weapons. And the fact that the Punic people since the 5th century BC were already using the Balearics as mercenaries, because they were gifted in the use of slings, proves that they had a previous tradition in armed conflicts.
It is written in classical sources that they were paid, but that they did not want currency. They preferred women and wine instead.
To make a sling, any material can be used, either artificial or natural, although if you have to use it in the Balearic competitions, it must always be made of natural materials. The most common material is pita, which comes from a plant, a cactus like this one, since it's easier to work with. You can also use esparto grass, which can be used to make other handicrafts. And finally we have hemp, very similar to pita, brownish, but they can serve just as well. The basic sling is the one we have, and it has 3 very important parts that define it. The ring, this part is placed around the finger. Then the central part, which is divided in 2, called a bag, in which the stone is placed. Finally, we have the end of the sling, or the tail, although it has different names, which gives it the characteristic sound of a whip. There are 3 typical types of sling: short, medium and a long sling. The long sling is usually about 1 meter long from the bag to the ring and is used for long distance shots. Medium slings are for accurate shots, 30, 40 or 50 meter distance. It would be a sling approximately this long that would go from my thumb to my shoulder. Then we have the third sling, a shorter one, to throw at targets a shorter distance away. If you compare this one to the other, it's quite a bit shorter, okay? And this would be for closer targets. The smaller sling was usually worn around slingers' heads. The medium sling was always carried in hand, and then the longest was worn around the waist, like a belt. They could therefore cover the entire battlefield with these 3 slings. The longer the distance they had to cover, or the farther the target was, supposedly, the smaller stones they had to use. And when the target was closer, they used blunt stones, and they could use stones, as it was usually said, like a mine. A mine, if I remember correctly, weighs about 500 grams, or half a kilo. So they are half-kilo stones that could be thrown at their enemies or against anything approaching. The Roman troops took a long time to conquer the islands because the slinger men obviously defended them and were very skilled. They were so good at throwing stones that they could shoot at the vessel's waterline and make holes in it until the vessel sank. It's not the same receiving the impact from one slinger as imagine 300 or 400 slinger men throwing stones non-stop at the very same target until they sank the vessel. Let's say they were the snipers of that time because they were so accurate and were easily able to hit their targets. Depending on the distance the enemy was, they might have started with 400-meter bursts, and while the enemies were approaching, they changed their slings until they were facing each other, the moment when the battle started. Slingermen did a lot of harm on the battlefield in that sense, because we can imagine 3,000 stones from 3,000 slingermen flying at the same time every 20 seconds.
What were the conditions of the population that had to defend themselves from the Romans?
It may have been a very residual, impoverished population, and we might even say that they had been plundered. How do we know that the rest of the people recruited by the Punic army didn't actually come back as soldiers? And this population then would be the one experiencing the Roman conquest in 123 BC. According to sources we know, they were bombarded with stone shots. Then Quintus Cecilius Metellus came and covered the vessels, covered the ships with cowhides, so that they could arrive behind this shield of leather and ransack the island.
The Romans invented their first armoured vessel because of the slingermen.
What is the major unknown to be discovered?
I think that everything is yet to be discovered. I mean that so far we have only begun to scratch the surface.
As I always say, the million-dollar question and challenge is to know what caused the birth of this Talayotic culture, what provoked the end of the pre-Talayotic world, and the birth of such a different culture in such a short period of time.
What mechanisms might be activated so that this change from a more egalitarian society to a more complex one could occur?